it's more important than ever to keep an eye on retirement.
Hi, and welcome into Eye on Retirement, the weekly show that keeps you in the know about all things retirement. Today we're discussing how a marriage, especially later in life, can affect your retirement plan overall. That's exactly why we've gathered the team here of professionals for this episode. I'm Jonathon McCoy, financial advisor and partner with Market Advisor Group. Alongside me, I've got Joshua Sikora, CPA and tax advisor from Market Tax Services. Doug Chowder, who's an estate planning attorney from Eidelman Law Firm, in-house with us here at Market Advisor Group. And Kimberly Sixkiller, Life and Long-Term Care Advisor from Market Advisor Group in our Life and Long-Term Care division. So we're going to be talking to Kim later in the show about some long-term care concepts and conversations we have with folks. But today we're going to start with the story on Mark, who is a client of mine that I've been working with for several months now. And he decided on a bit of an early retirement going into his retirement years prior to the age of 59 and a half, which, as you'll discover, is a key age that makes a difference in terms of withdrawal limitations and limiting your access to health insurance, so on and so forth. So he's got sort of these elongated retirement concerns, having a few more years in retirement than a lot of folks. And that's going to require some changes in terms of how he's going to be withdrawing on his investments. And in Mark's case, there's also the possibility he may get married here soon. So he plans to access potential widow's benefits from Social Security, from his former and deceased spouse. And how do all of these things affect decision-making when preparing for retirement? And ultimately, in Mark's case, as many of you out there may be thinking, I'd like to eke out some of those extra years in retirement. What are some of these action items we need to take? So I wanted to start with focusing on the tax concerns, especially for somebody considering an early retirement. So Joshua, how do these rules work regarding taxation of retirement accounts, especially somebody that's retiring like Mark prior to age 59 and a half?
Yeah, well, in a word, it's tricky, right? So for most folks, when they retire, they move everything out to traditional IRA, thereby gaining investment control, tax control. But in Mark's case, that was going to cause a problem because, as you mentioned, he's under 59 and a half. And so if he did do that and then start pulling money out for cash flow from that traditional IRA, he's going to be subject to a early distribution penalty. 10% on top of whatever taxes he would normally have to pay. That's going to be a little bit spicy as he moves into retirement and really not optimal in his situation.
So define spicy for me a little bit since you used the word. What sort of things can happen if you've planned around accessing retirement funds prior to age 59 and a half?
Yeah, so let's just say he's normally in a 12% bracket. A lot of people we meet with, that's where they're starting out at. Or maybe he's got a little more cash flow going through, he's 22%. Mm-hmm. Well, now we're talking 22 and 32% taxes before we even talk about adding the state in. That's going to be expensive. That is really going to change the long-term picture of his retirement nest egg, because that is a bigger drain than probably what he was anticipating. And unlike movement in the stock market, those losses never come back.
So why is age 59 and a half a specific age that we have to pay attention to in terms of, penalties and things like that, limitations to early retirement, we'll call them?
Honestly, that's just the way the tax code's written. There's no eloquent explanation as to why they chose that. I have a feeling in some dark, musty room, they were arguing back and forth, and that was just the compromise, was 59 and a half. And so if he was much younger, there are things we could do to give him access to those funds inside of a traditional IRA. But in his situation, he had worked a long time for an employer who had an employer plan, and a lot of times people know those as 401ks.
Right. And
so we were able to then start using that account, move some of the funds out, to work with you, but then keep funds there, because a 401k, in a rare difference between traditional IRAs and those 401ks, they allow you to access the funds if you leave your employer who's managing the plan at age 55.
Okay.
And so then that gives him then the opportunity to have funds that are there for cash flow needs, but then have other funds invested, meeting his, risk tolerances and whatever you talk about with clients.
The important stuff, right?
Yeah, stuff that's outside of my lane.
Yeah.
But then it gives him the flexibility. He's now starting to get into something we call tax diversification, where he's got different accounts with different sets of tax rules that give him the ability to start doing different things in retirement.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's these limitations to accessing retirement accounts in quote unquote an early retirement situation. Yep. And I encourage folks out there, don't take what Joshua is saying as kind of a general all plans fit these same rules, because that can be an employer by employer difference in terms of how you're allowed to access those funds in 401ks and 403bs, but what sort of conversations need to be had for the benefit of the client when, us as advisors, we're building their investment management portfolio to provide the income strategies that they need and the flow of income throughout retirement. For anyone thinking of retiring early, like Mark, what is really kind of a key importance? Because had he just jumped into this and moved all his money out of his 401k, he probably wouldn't have found out until when that, some of these early withdrawal penalties and things like that kick in.
When he goes and files his tax return, and by then it's way too late. If someone's thinking about retiring early being defined as before 59 and a half, that tax diversification is so important because it gives you ways to access the funds in different ways. So, there's the old saying, a stitch in time saves nine, right? So having that plan set in advance is going to empower people to do that early retirement and have the safety in knowing that they've got a plan ready to go to enable them to go down that road.
Exactly, and I think the key focus, and we hit on this in just about every episode here on Eye on Retirement, is, financial advisors have sort of their lane of advice that they can provide. Estate planning attorneys, insurance experts, and even tax professionals have sort of their specified lane that they can operate within. And ultimately, retirement is a highway. There's a lot of lanes here. There's a lot of risks. There's a lot of financial issues that can come up. And really what dictates the direction you're heading is where you are and where you want to be. In Mark's circumstance, coming into a late life relationship, or he may be getting married. We're going to be touching base on some of that with Doug Schauder, our estate planning attorney, and what blending families later in life means and looks like for retirees. But with these tax situations like Joshua just hit home with, if you stumble into and realize that you've made a big mistake after the fact and cause yourself the risk that you may have to go back to work or that you've got to make other more significant changes to your financial plan, you don't want to be looking in the rearview mirror saying, coulda, woulda, shoulda on retirement. And in Mark's situation, that's exactly why we were approaching this from a team perspective and making sure that we've got all of these different ingredients addressed before Mark ultimately decided to make the decision to retire. So at Market Advisor Group, we take the weight off your shoulders. Sometimes all it can take is a 15-minute in-person or over-the-phone conversation. And to set up that introductory phone call, just reach out to us at 833-44-CORE4. That's 833-442-6734. Or check out our website at retirementhelp.com. That's our new online resource that we set up to educate people just like you about all things retirement. When we come back, we'll be continuing Mark's story with his health, and stay tuned. Welcome back into Eye on Retirement. The last segment, we discussed the tax challenges that come along with an early retirement for someone like our client, Mark. And in this segment, I want to touch on the opposite end of the retirement years and what happens later in life. And for Mark, the concern is, we might have this elongated 35, 40-year retirement where he's deciding to retire early. He's got pretty good longevity expectation in his family history as well. So at those years when Mark has kind of done the living that needed to be done, gotten the bucket list taken care of, and life is starting to really sort of slow down, now he's faced with the primary financial risk that most folks face in their late retirement years. And Kim, I want to turn to you. It's not fun thinking ahead when in Mark's case, he's just retiring this year, literally. It's not very fun to think about what those longer term financial risks might be from a healthcare perspective. What do you really focus on in terms of the most important factors to remaining financially prepared for those years, especially for somebody considering retirement today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of the fun killer to kind of come in and be like, all right, you're going to retire. Now let's plan for when you can't do the things you want to do anymore. For Mark, we really sat down and thought about what is everything that you want to be able to do after the bucket list, right? For example, do you have that goal to be able to stay in your home as long as you want? Do you want to be able to bring nursing into you and be able to live in this home that you've made and your family loves? We also talk about mitigating the risk early. So a lot of people find that they think long-term care planning is something they'll put off until their 60s, something that they'll do after they join Medicare. When the reality is the earlier that you really dive into your long-term care planning and the earlier that you come up with the solutions for how you want to have money to prevent being a burden, the cheaper that it can be for you.
Yes, and so I mean, there's the cost effectiveness, right, and a big concern around a lot of people. If you're out there watching today and you've shopped around at all for any kind of like traditional long-term care type insurance, we're not here, pitching any specific product. Ultimately, it gets down to what are those root concerns, right, and what are some of the things that you're hearing from folks in terms of their goals behind what we call long-term care planning, but ultimately it's that late life lifestyle, right, and what are people trying to attain? What are those common concerns there?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing is people don't want to be a burden, right? They find that this is one of the largest generations who is living through taking care of their parents and kind of navigating the high cost of the nursing home. And so really having to look at quitting their jobs to help take care of things or really change their lives. And people are like, I don't want this for my children. I don't want this for my loved ones. So that's one of the biggest pieces. And then there's a real fear about what Medicaid is going to look like, the impacts of having to go through some kind of Medicaid spend down. That's things that Doug joins us with a lot. But then also just the control over their lifestyle. Again, that living environment. They want to live on their own terms, and they're looking for something that helps them do that.
Yeah, and I recognize that you and I have a lot of these discussions, so there's 3-4 layers deeper to go in terms of one-on-one circumstances, family circumstances, who might be there to be able to take care of you within your family, and sometimes people have family members that are willing to do that, but just regarding long-term care coverage through, insurance and investment plans, all these different products, features, benefits, what are some of the things that you're helping to reiterate and getting into some of the conversations that you and I have with folks like Mark to try to keep people open-minded about their long-term care planning, what solutions may or may not be out there? Because if somebody has sat down with a traditional insurance agent about long-term care, they may have a little bit of a skewed perspective on what some of those options are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the biggest thing that we kind of take on head on is this isn't like car insurance where you pay for it monthly and you hope that there is never an accident, and then when there is no accident, that money is gone, right? There are now solutions that allow you to kind of protect that investment in some form so that if nothing ever happens and you're able to be spry and live a long, healthy life, and then you pass away, there can be benefits passed on to your trust, your loved ones, the CAT Association, whoever it is that you select. And so knowing that long-term care is not just this huge chunk of change that I'm going to set away and maybe throw away. It's really that. And then ultimately making sure people understand that unlike the insurance that used to exist a decade, 2 decades ago, in most states, you can get plans for all the way up to age 85 and have those issued with very minimal requirements. So you didn't necessarily miss the boat if you didn't plan in your 50s or 60s. There are still some options.
So there's obviously some misconceptions out there. And I've heard these in a lot of our meetings with folks is, either I'm too old, we don't have enough money, or our only option is to just kind of sit back and take it. And, we're almost guaranteed to wind up on Medicaid. So do you have any maybe examples of how someone's perspective was maybe changed just from a long-term care planning perspective and maybe drawn from some of those conversations that you and I have had with folks in terms of, if we're looking forward to those late years and maybe somebody's not expected to use all of their retirement savings, what are some of the early questions that we look at to open up? I think of what money do they expect to spend if they had sort of this need? How does that help someone maybe start the conversation on planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So, even in cases like Mark, when you're looking at the finances and they're going, I don't know if this makes sense for me to do. I feel like I have the funds. Do I want to tie up these funds? Do I want to throw away these funds? And really sitting down and looking at the costs in their case of that long-term care and saying, okay, well, you've got a great pension coming in, or you've got that Social Security coming in, you've got this money coming in that you're like, okay, I have some funds. And we say, all right, if we can just carve out a piece of that retirement, maybe some of that money from the 401k or the IRA, and we purchase some kind of a hybrid policy that allows you to have extra money should you need it for long-term care.
Right.
We are now really protecting, and in his case, about 1% of the cost, we're protecting his entire portfolio, right? And so what we've done there is we've said, okay, now we've removed this risk and really made it more of a patched hole in the boat. Now consider what you can do for your family if you don't have to worry about these funds that you wanted to pay for the weddings for your grandkids to go away. Where can you really plan further with your funds, because this small portion of your assets is now protecting your portfolio from a healthcare risk, which ultimately is one of the top risks that everyone looks at once they get into that retirement phase.
Well, and even if you're watching out there and you're retired, or you're approaching the peak of your retirement savings years, or maybe you've already started your descent into retirement. I don't like the word descent. Let's call it an ascent into retirement, right? And you feel like you haven't solidified that footing yet, and you've got these concerns around long-term care and what retirement really is going to cost you. Market Advisor Group could help you find your way down that mountain. To set up a 15-minute introductory phone call and see if we're the team for you, just reach out at 833-44-CORE4. We'll get you in contact with experts like Kim, Doug, Joshua, all of these teams from across our departmental expertise. And there you can also watch episodes on our website, retirementhelp.com, or possibly submit a question for us to possibly answer in a future episode. When we come back, we'll be finishing up Mark's story with estate planning. And what does it look like when we're looking at blending families, especially with children from both sides of the marriage later in life? Stay tuned. Welcome back into Eye on Retirement. And for Mark, our focus of our episode today, we've talked about early retirement tax implications. We've also talked about late retirement, lifestyle cost, and healthcare expectations and concerns for someone who's going to be living maybe a few extra years than a lot of people do in retirement, planning on to retire prior to age 60. And now I want to focus on Mark's personal and family situation with our estate planning attorney, Doug Chowder, today. So, Doug, Mark is a widower. He plans to be married again someday, whether it's a few years down the road, but he's currently engaged to be married, and they're kind of working out this timing of when's the right time to do it, how might it impact things like Social Security benefits, so on and so forth. But from an estate planning perspective, we deal a lot with these situations where people are blending families. They each have kids from previous marriages, and in this case, somewhat uniquely, both Mark and his fiancée are widowed, and their spouses have passed. So what are some of the challenges of estate planning that we commonly see when we're talking to people that are actively involved in living in these blended marriages? You know, the separation of assets, who gets what and when, how do we protect a surviving spouse if someone does pass away later in life? What are some of these common concerns that we talk about?
Yeah, and that's something that we see lots of these days with blended families. There are a lot of folks that are getting married later in life, and there are a lot of changes that happen with that blended family. And like you talk about, there are a lot of different considerations when folks are bringing assets from, possibly that they inherited from a spouse, and assets that they have brought in together into the marriage. Mm-hmm. And actually, in Mark's situation, one thing he needs to consider is that getting married changes a lot. With the tax effects of marriage, sometimes it's a benefit, sometimes it's not as much of a benefit. Certainly, it changes it in terms of estate planning. Once a person is married, the spouse is entitled under probate law to a certain percentage of the assets of the couple. So those types of things make a difference and are something that need to be considered. But when folks are blended family, whether they're married or whether they're individuals that are just single living together, the separate influences have to all be considered into that.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the ugly word in the middle there, probate, which is often, I think, the triggering concern or question that brings people to talk about or think about estate planning in general. And we could talk a little bit about probate before the end of the episode, assuming we have some time here. But I want to focus on some of these other things. When we talk about what powers does maybe someone else need to have in your situation in the event that you become incapacitated, and what sorts of conversations do you recommend folks have regarding their wishes, distributions of assets, managing their health care, legal and financial decisions, all of those additional concerns outside of just how do I avoid probate?
Sure, and those are a lot of conversations that can be difficult for folks to have. Mm-hmm. You're looking at, okay, well, I'm now remarried to this person. Do I want to have them make decisions for me, or do I want to have like an adult child or something have those decisions? And that's something that having those conversations ahead of time is important to figure out, because there are a lot of folks who kind of don't think about it until they're in the moment and they're needing to sign a power of attorney or something. But talk about, what their goals are for how they want to pass things on. With Mark, for example, with his lake house, he wants that to pass on to his daughter because that's something that they have had as that family connection for many years.
Right. And, I think about when you talk about powers of attorney, the ugliest situations that we see are when someone becomes incapacitated and they don't have that backup in place. They don't have that other person, the doctors or the financial institutions are really legally allowed to talk to take instruction from. And I think a lot of folks, if you're out there watching today, a lot of people wind up making the assumption that, it's going to be my spouse, or, it's going to be my child. But if you don't have some of these things in writing, where does that leave you?
Yeah, and particularly with like the healthcare power of attorney, although it's the same situation for financial matters, is if a person goes to the hospital and they haven't made these plans ahead of time, a fiance is not able to just step in and say, well, this is what he wanted, we talked about these things. They can't make those decisions. And frankly, even children and spouses still have that same issue many times. Right. So that having those documents in place is really critical.
And touch real quickly on this for us. So does everyone entering into a blended family or maybe getting married like Mark, does everyone need a trust?
Everyone doesn't need a trust. There are certainly a lot of issues that a trust can solve and help kind of clear up. And it makes a difference kind of how people's relationships are and what happens with this. If they've been married, younger, while the children are still in the house, a lot of times folks will look at, this is our literally blended family. We're very, very much all in the same
Everything's
unit.
Equal.
And,
right.
and other folks who are coming in more like Mark and his fiance are going to have a situation where they've got much more separate assets. Their kids are grown. They've got, separate goals for what they want to do. And a lot of times you'll have individual trust for folks like that. And there are some folks who may have both. They may have a trust that's kind of for their common property. Yeah. And they may have individual trust that they have,
it's kind of a swirling soup of options depending on the family situation. That's why it's so important to sit down with the experts before putting the plan in place. So no matter how good you think your plan is, it's important to understand that you need to know how to pivot when life changes. And when those things are thrown at you, such as late life change in your marital situation, whatever that may be, at Market Advisor Group, that's exactly what we're here to address. If you'd like to set up a 15-minute introductory call to see what might be lurking in your retirement plan, reach out at 833-44-CORE4. That's 833-442-6734. Or check out our website at retirementhelp.com. There you can also watch past episodes of our show, research your retirement questions, or set up a 15-minute call with one of our advisors. That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Jonathon McCoy, along with our entire panel of experts, reminding you that we're here to keep an eye on retirement.
Investment advisory services are duly offered through Foundations Investment Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor, and Market Investment Group LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The investment advisor representatives of Market are also affiliated with and registered through Foundations Investment Advisors LLC, and may provide services on behalf of both firms to client or prospective clients where properly licensed or exempt. This show is presented by Market Investment Group LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor that only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean that the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. The firm is not engaged in the practice of law or accounting. The information presented is believed to be current. It should not be viewed as personalized investment advice. All expressions of opinion reflect the judgment of the presenter on the date of the show's publication and are subject to change. The information presented is not an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation of any offer to buy or sell any of the securities discussed. You should consult with a professional advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed. Any legal or tax information provided in this show is general in nature. Always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation. Annuity and life insurance guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. If you withdraw money from or surrender your contract within a certain time after investing, the insurance company may assess a surrender charge. Withdrawals may be subject to tax penalties and income taxes. Persons selling annuities and other insurance products receive compensation for these transactions. These commissions are separate and distinct from fees charged for advisory services. Insurance products also contain additional fees and expenses. Social Security rules and regulations are subject to change at any time. Always consult with your local Social Security office before acting upon any information provided herein. A Roth conversion may not be suitable for your situation. The primary goal in converting retirement assets into a Roth IRA is to reduce the future tax liability on the distributions you take in retirement or on the distributions of your beneficiaries. The information provided is to help you determine whether or not a Roth IRA conversion may be appropriate for your particular circumstances. Please review your retirement savings, tax, and legacy planning strategies with your legal/tax advisor to be sure a Roth IRA conversion fits into your planning strategies. plans. This is not endorsed by the U.S. government or associated with any federal Medicare program. We do not offer every plan available in your area. Any information we provide is limited to those plans we do offer in your area. Please contact Medicare.gov or 1-800-Medicare to get information on all your options. All client or prospective client names have been changed to protect the identities of the individuals discussed. All rights reserved.